All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to George Croft's American Music Show. Today, we are diving into the life and career of Lefty Frizzell, so stick around. Ladies and gentlemen, this week is your last chance to get your tickets to the Kennedy Meadows Music Festival. That is Friday the 22nd through Sunday the 24th. I will be playing Saturday and Sunday, and I'll be the MC for the whole weekend here, so I'll be there starting Friday morning. So come and see us. Get your tickets while you can. I think it's KennedyMeadowsMusicFest.com. And then the next big thing on the books is October 16th. I'm coming to Nashville to play the Ryman Plaza stage. So if you're in town for the Jason Isbell show on the 16th, come see me out front before the show. And we'll see you then. We are also brought to you by Tyler & Co. Marketing, providing top-notch photography and videography services to Northern California. Tyler & Co. is your one-stop shop for social media content, product videos, commercials, promotional videos, and best of all, weddings and events. I dare you to take a quick scroll down their Instagram page at TylerandCo_marketing and tell me it doesn't look like a Hollywood production. If you want people to ask you who the executive producer of your wedding was, call Tyler & Co. If you want it to look like you got paid just to be in your wedding photos, call Tyler & Co. If you want the video of your first dance to look like it qualified you for the Screen Actors Guild, call Tyler & Co. And best of all, your future father-in-law is going to forgive you for everything. Everything. When he finds out how much money you're saving him on this wedding by using Tyler & Co. marketing to capture your big day. So visit tylerandcofilms.com for all your photography needs. That's tylerandcofilms.com. All right, so Lefty Frizzell is another one of these foundational characters. I mean, we've talked about a lot of them, but I feel like we would be remiss without doing an episode on this guy, because he came up around the same time as Hank Williams with a similar style, similar skill set, and he was outshined by Hank a little bit, but he was still just had a massive impact on some of the legends that we've already done episodes on, like George Jones and Merle Haggard and, all these guys. So he's born in 1928 in Corsicana, Texas, to his dad was an oil field worker and a pretty rough dude by all accounts, at least, during this phase of time. His brother his brother David writes a book about, kind of Lefty's story and their childhood and stuff, and kind of describes their dad back then as this like kind of mean drunk fighting, a kind of abusive dude. I guess in his later years, in his old age, he becomes this like sweet old grandpa character, but in the beginning here, he's a rough guy. And it's funny, if you look at pictures, so his name was Naaman. His name was Naaman Orville. And his mom's name was Addie. So Naaman, everybody called Naaman Red. And if you look at pictures of them side by side, it's kind of funny because if you took a picture of Lefty Frizzell, who in his nice clean cut image, and then you look at a picture of his dad, it just looks like you asked ChatGPT to make Lefty look meaner. Like they have very similar facial features, but Red just looks like an intense mean dude. And so their early childhoods are full of stories that you might expect from a household with a mean drunk in it. And but their mom, on the other hand, was like this super loving, super loyal to her kids, always tried to kind of protect everybody type of character. And so his early childhood is marked by just moving around a crazy amount. So they're moving because Red is chasing jobs, obviously. He's, following oil field work anywhere he can get it. So they're kind of bouncing around Texas, Louisiana, New Mexico, wherever he can find oil work, that's where they went. They're also moving as Red gets in trouble with the law. So there's one incident where Red and his dad, so Lefty's grandpa, somehow get in a fight with a group of other guys. And like these two, the father and son pair, are just kind of whipping everybody in this group. The cops show up and try to arrest them. And then they like broke one cop's arm, and like it took like 7 police officers to get this father and son pair into the jail. And the dad, so Red's dad is let go on bail, but Red is put in jail, and he's, put on a work crew, I think. And somehow he escapes. And this is, the late 30s, early 40s. So when you escape from jail, like, it's kind of easy to just pick your life back up in the next county or state or something. And that's what he does. So they move. I think they might have moved to Louisiana at this point, but I might be wrong about that. But anyway, he strikes up a deal with this old black man that owned this chunk of property. Basically, there was a chunk of land where the oil company was drilling, and then there was this chunk of property that this old black man owned, and if you had a road through there, it would cut the travel time to the drill site like by a lot. So all the workers were already kind of just cutting across this dude's land. And Red convinces this guy that, hey, why don't I build a shack on your road, and I'll charge these guys a toll coming through here. And so for a while there, while Lefty's, he's pretty little at this point, his dad has set up this toll shack and is selling, like, his mom is selling like drinks and food to the oil workers, and his dad is selling bootleg whiskey. And this is during Prohibition. And there's a bunch of like incidents that come out of that. Like the cops come out a bunch of times and try to catch him, but they can never find where his stash is. And that ends when some guy shows up in the middle of the night looking through the window and, scares Lefty's mom. And she's yelling out the door, go away, and the guy outside is yelling back, send Red out. I need some of his whiskey or whatever. And Red wakes up and says, I'm coming outside, but I'm shooting the first thing I see, kicks the door open, and just starts shooting at this dude who's running off into the dark. And they never, Red does not stick around to figure out if he killed that guy or not. He just shot at him a couple of times. The next morning, packs the family up, and they leave. And that's, like I said, Lefty's childhood is full of stories like that. Just like lots of chaos. And then, here we go, 1941, he gets an interesting, I mentioned in a previous episode how other artists that we've talked about, all of their lives are impacted, I said by World War II, and the artist that I mentioned was Johnny Cash and George Jones. That's probably not the best artist to pick for that example. Their lives were obviously, they grew up in that time frame, and it was an impact on the American culture. But this is an example where World War II kind of plucks Lefty Frizzell's dad out of the picture. Because his dad, I don't know if he was doing it for money reasons or if he did it for, the book says he did it because he thought it was his patriotic duty. But he enlists in the Army Air Corps at the beginning of World War II, so in 1941. And at first, that moves the family to Texas, because he's in Texas for like a year or something, training and getting ready to deploy. Then he leaves in 1942 and goes to Europe. And the family of 7 kids at the time does not see him again until 1945, when the war's over and he gets out. And which that time period of him being gone was basically Lefty's high school experience. So... And like I said, it seems like that may have kind of been a relief because Red was kind of a hellion at the time. But anyway, also during that time, it seems like either shortly before that happened or right after his dad was gone, this is where Lefty really starts to kind of settle into his musical ambitions here. He'd always been talented, and he'd done, talent shows, and he was little and sang in front of church and stuff. But this is where he kind of starts to focus on it more. And so his mom would take them to visit his uncle. And down the street from his uncle was this old black blues player who, just like this old black dude with a guitar that would just teach the kid when he asked, kind of thing. And so Lefty always liked going there. By the way, when I say Lefty, at this stage of his life, they called him Sonny. That was his nickname that his parents gave him. They start calling him Lefty after he gets in a fight in high school, and supposedly there's varying stories on this, but the generally accepted account is that he got in a fight with a bully and kind of sucker punched this bully kid at school, and that kid called him a lefty devil because he was, I guess he hit him with his left hand. And he said, you lefty devil, and that kind of stuck, so now we get Lefty Frizzell. So that happens when he's like 14 or 15 or something. So anyway, we'll refer to him as Lefty from here on out. And so Lefty has convinced his mom to go visit his uncle so that he can go down the street to this, old man's house so he can learn to play guitar. And after that happens a couple of times, they get to the uncle's house. Lefty just gets out of the car and takes off down the road to go learn, for his guitar lesson. And his uncle is kind of like, what's going on down there? Like, where's Lefty going? And his mom tells him about this old man that's teaching him how to play guitar. So his uncle just loads everybody up and is like, let's go down there and see what's going on. We'll see if we can hear him play. And they go down there. Lefty is just learning how to play, his chords. He's at the very, very, very beginning of learning to play guitar. But his uncle decides that Lefty needs to keep doing this, and he's got enough of a spark going. And at the time, like I said, this is the 40s. They had no money. This was like, mom could not go buy him a guitar. They had $0 extra dollars. And, but his uncle strikes up a conversation with just this old black dude that lived down the road. And he was like, hey, like, how much you want for your guitar? And I'll give it to the kid. And I think he buys it for like $2.50 or something, which, I mean, at the time, kind of a lot of money, I guess. But so his uncle just puts up the money, buys this guitar from the guy that's teaching him, and gives it to Lefty to keep learning. And that really, from there, it's off to the races. He slept with that guitar, like, in his hands. He would just wake up, listen to the radio. He was constantly teaching himself Jimmie Rodgers songs and whatever else he could find on the radio. Because you got to remember, this is the 40s. So this is the era. It's basically Jimmie Rodgers and, like, Little Jimmy Dickens. And, we're, like, Hank Williams is not on the scene yet at this stage. So, but he continues to grow his talent. He starts getting local gigs, playing talent shows and radio shows and whatever else. And, he starts to kind of develop his skill to a marketable thing. Like, now he's making money. And, so in 1945, like I said, right as his dad gets back from World War II, I'm not exactly sure where the dates fall on this, but basically his dad leaves when he's, early high school or before high school. And by the time Red gets back from World War II, Lefty's 19 years old. He's getting married. So he's either just gotten married when his dad gets home or he's married soon after. I'm not exactly sure what the order of events is there, but 1945, he gets married to his high school sweetheart. And that starts a similar story to others that we've covered. Like, they stay married for, 30 something years, but it is not a smooth ride for Mrs. Frizzell here. And, starting almost immediately, by the way. So like this, yeah. So they get married, and, let's see here. This is 1947. Okay. So they get married in 45. A couple of years later, you got to understand that at this point, him and his band are playing enough gigs, and they've got enough of a following. And we're running into the same issue that we've run into with a lot of the other historical figures that we've talked about, like a disturbingly common thread in some of our episodes, actually. Lefty Frizzell gets involved with a young girl. She's 14 and he's 20 or whatever, 21. And now apparently the way everybody tells it is like this was, everybody makes excuses at the time. But apparently there was like this whole gang of girls that would just kind of follow Lefty and the band around, and they would, hang out after the shows, and eventually that turns into this, extramarital affair. Now, that girl that eventually gets him in trouble, supposedly when she like basically flips on him, like Lefty didn't get caught necessarily as much as I think she like told either her parents or the police or whatever, but it was Lefty and 4 other people that she says, you know, basically she says they abused her, and he's convicted of statutory rape. And like I said, this day and age, that's kind of the end of your career. You're toast. Like we're not coming back after that. But like I said, it's disturbingly common for this time period that we've been covering. So and it goes on into like the 60s where we've got these guys with young girlfriends and wives at the time that are just, and it's having all these, I mean, at the same time that they make the claim, oh, it was a different time, they're also like Jerry Lee Lewis, his career is tanked. Like Roy Orbison is like Sam Phillips is smart enough to tell him not to bring attention to his marriage, like when he tries to write the song about it. There's Elvis Presley, like I think his, you know, he goes on to marry her when she was like, you know, when they met, she was like 14 or something. So there's just all the, and then Chuck Berry had a similar kind of thing going on. Like there was just all these characters that end up involved with these girls that are like 14 to 16. And it's way more common than I expected to find digging through some of these historical accounts. Anyway, Lefty Frizzell goes to jail for 6 months. And I think actually his brother says in the book that there was some kind of shenanigans going on there, because later the same girl accused another guy in the same county for the same crime. And that dude only got probation somehow. So there's a little bit of questions raised about the exact scenario. But anyway, this prison sentence, or not prison, it's jail. It's 6 months in the county jail. And unlike his dad, he does not escape. And he does not, you know, he just does his time. But while he's there, he really does seem to have, I guess, jail has the desired effect on him. He's, you know, remorseful, and he's writing all these letters to his wife apologizing. He's writing poems. He's writing songs. And some of those songs that he wrote in jail are going to be the songs that shoot him into stardom when he gets out. So he gets out in 1948, I guess. And then, oh, no. So this is, it says 1949 he was released. I'm not 100% sure about that timeline, because he only did 6 months in jail. But anyway, when he gets out of jail, he goes to work in the oil field with his dad. Like, he just kind of falls back into the manual labor side of things. And that doesn't last very long, because, I mean, first of all, I think he gets a rude awakening for how hard that life is. And, you know, his brother made it sound like he would come home too tired to even, like, lift food off the plate into his mouth. And his wife would have to, like, spoon feed him and, like, clean him up, because he would just come home fully exhausted, no energy left. And so he decides that only lasts for a little while. And he's like, all right, I'm not doing this. I'm going back to doing music. And so that's 1950. Let's see here. 1950. So he's released from jail in 49, and then 1950 is where he goes to Jim Beck's studio in Dallas and records a couple of demos. And there's a little bit of confusion about exactly what happened. If You've Got the Money, I've Got the Time, which is a song that probably one of his more famous songs that goes on to be covered by a ton of people. It's still getting covered to this day. And he hadn't finished that song. So he walks into this studio, and it sounds like he had a couple other songs that he had already done. And the guy was kind of like, do you have anything more upbeat? Like, these are all these sad ballads. Like, you got anything else? And he was like, well, I have a half-written song. And he plays in the first half of If You've Got the Money. And, you know, Jim Beck is like, yeah, finish that and let's record that. So that's where, like, that song gets finished and recorded. And So Jim Beck then takes that set of demos and pitches it to a couple of different people. One of which, so he ends up at Columbia Records, but he took it to Nashville first and he pitched it to Little Jimmy Dickens, who was like king of the Opry at the time. And Little Jimmy Dickens didn't like it. A song that would go on to be played on the Opry over and over and over again. Little Jimmy Dickens turned it down and he was like, no, this isn't, there's nothing here. So, Beck takes it to Columbia Records. They think it's great. They pick him up. And that's basically the start of Lefty Frizzell's, rise to fame here. And so he records If You've Got the Money at Columbia. And I Love You 1,000 Ways. That reached number 1, which I think I Love You 1,000 Ways, I think is the song that he wrote in jail to his wife. And so this is 1950, 1951. He's picking up steam here. He's getting hit after hit after hit. And also in 1951, this is the stage where Hank Williams is a big deal. So, you remember Hank Williams was coming up they're literally like right next to each other with similar styles and similar, music. And, let's see here. So in 1951, he's touring with Hank Williams. And somewhere in here, I think it's 1951. Yeah, August of 1951. So remember, he just got out of jail in 1949 for statutory rape. Here we are, August of 1951. He's in the middle of touring with Hank Williams. His star has just shot up the charts. Like, this is, an early peak in his initial fame here. Like, to the point where at some stage here in 1951, Lefty Frizzell had written 4 of the top 5 songs on the Billboard charts at the time. He had 4 songs in the top 10. And at one point, they had number 1, 2, 3, and 5, which is nuts because number 4 was a Hank Williams song, which I can't remember which one it was. But Lefty had 1, 2, 3, and 4, or 1, 2, and 3. Hank had number 4, and then number 5 was Lefty again, which was the first time that had ever happened. No artist had 4 songs in the top 10 or top 5 because it was both sides of 2 records that came out. It was like the A and the B of 2 back-to-back releases, number 1, 2, 4, and 5. And so this is, you can imagine, he's just full send, big deal, selling records, money starting to come in. Problem arises here in August of 1951. He's performing at the Grand Ole Opry, which is at the Ryman Auditorium at the time. And he's with Hank Williams. The police come backstage and arrest him again for being involved with underage girls. And it's, supposedly it happened while he was on tour with Hank. So Hank doesn't get swept up in this deal, which I think is pretty telling. Like, that's actually kind of, like, you can imagine at the time being like the police officer and being the guy receiving the report. By the way, these charges are later dropped and Lefty is not prosecuted for this deal, but they go through the effort of going into the Ryman Auditorium and arresting Lefty Frizzell, which is quite the spectacle. And if you didn't have a good reason to do that, I'm not sure that they would. And I'm also pretty sure that if Hank Williams had been associated with any of that stuff while they were on tour together, they would have also nabbed him, because if they're willing to do it to Lefty, they would have been willing to do it to Hank. So the idea that this was just normal behavior at the time is further degraded, because if it was, Hank would have been involved, because him and Lefty were tight at the time. They were like just partners in crime in every other way, because they were living very similar lives, very similar proclivities to like drugs and alcohol. Like, Lefty's already at this point got a nasty alcohol problem, and Hank is, halfway through drinking himself to death. He's dead 2 years after this. So like, they were basically the same type of dude, singing the same type of music, wearing the same kind of suits, doing everything the same. But when it came time to get arrested for messing around with underage girls, it was only Lefty. And that sticks out to me a little bit. But anyway, That being said, it doesn't seem to affect his trajectory too bad, because like I said, he's not prosecuted for it, so somehow the charges get dropped later. And but that's kind of the start of problems for Lefty. Like the first time he went to jail for it, he kind of got a mulligan and his career was able to take off anyway. The second time, it does kind of, I don't know if it directly caused it, but it's sort of the marker for, from here, his career does not reach that same peak again. I mean, he has other successes, fine. It's not all downhill from here, but it's never quite the same. So, because like here in like 1952, late 52, early 53, I think, he leaves the Opry, he fires his manager, he fires his band, he kind of tries to start over, he moves to LA, and it just doesn't pay off the way that he had kind of thought. And he's also just burning through all of his money. So he's doing the same thing that some of our other artists have talked about, where they just spend an ungodly amount of money on houses and cars and everything else. And this is, by the way, he's also at this stage, he did the same thing that like Jim Croce did, where like he didn't read any of his contracts that he was given. He just signed wherever people asked him to because they said they were going to help him. So he signed these terrible contracts that were giving, I think I read somewhere that at one point, like 2/3 of the money he generated did not go to him. It went to, his managers and everybody else around him, and that like not normal at the time. And, and at one point, I think, one of his managers, somebody got a 50% writing credit on a song that they did not touch. Like they weren't part of producing it. They weren't part of writing it at all. And somehow, I think it was his manager or somebody got a 50% writing credit on a song that was a hit, and that dude made a ton of money off of. And that always stuck in Lefty's, craw a little bit. But anyway, so I feel it's necessary at this point, now that we've seen the kind of first spike in his career success, because, he has a pretty outsized impact on lots of other people that we have covered. And that impact is made on them during this time. So from 49 to 52, you're talking that like his radio hits are hitting the ears of people like Willie Nelson, people like George Jones, people like Merle Haggard, people like Keith Whitley. Keith Whitley idolized Lefty Frizzell. People like Roy Orbison also idolized Lefty Frizzell. Roy Orbison, I don't know if I mentioned it. Roy Orbison was our last episode we did. I don't think I mentioned it at the time, but when Roy Orbison joined the Traveling Wilburys, which was like the super band that, got put together towards the end of his life, each character in the Traveling Wilburys picked a name of, like, they picked like a different name like with the last name Wilbury, right? So I can't, and then I should have written this down beforehand, but I can't remember what Tom Petty's name was. But anyway, Roy Orbison picks the name Lefty Wilbury as a nod to Lefty Frizzell. Like that's what he's doing. Willie Nelson does an entire album dedicated to Lefty Frizzell. Like Willie Nelson is one of the string of dudes, like, so you can imagine in the, late 40s, early 50s, as Lefty is touring around doing all these shows and getting himself in all kinds of trouble, he's also stopping at all these different radio stations and all these different venues, and he's meeting all these young up-and-comers. One of them, it happens a couple of different times. So the first time he meets Willie Nelson is when Willie Nelson is working at the radio station, and I think it was, it might have been Lubbock, Texas. I can't remember the town, but it's before Willie had moved to Nashville when he was still in Texas, as working as a radio DJ. Lefty comes in the building, and somehow Willie gets the chance to perform for him, and Lefty's voice was very clear. And he had a lot of depth. His enunciation was great. It was just this crisp, like, everybody that talks about Lefty Frizzell's voice since then describes it as the right way to do it. Like, it's everyone else, even like people said that George Jones, everybody could sing, they would want to sing like George Jones. George Jones says that about Lefty. Like, that's the lineage of skill here, is that George Jones told everybody that if you ever get stuck, sing it like Lefty did it and you'll be fine. And anyway, so the idea that everybody's doing it the way Lefty did it, Willie Nelson did it so on par, like he did it exactly like Lefty when he's playing it for Lefty. And when he looks up at the end of the song to like, hey, get a pat on the back, Lefty kind of gives him the, that's good, man. You got anything of your own? Like, basically telling him, like, don't sound exactly like me. Like, what do you have that's you? Which seems to be a pretty common conversation that he has. Because, like, he, especially his brother David later, his brother, he says that one of the things that Lefty would just tell him all the time was, like, figure out how to be David. Stop trying to be, you know, some other character. And so that happens with Willie Nelson. Around the same time, this is where you get him bouncing into the Merle Haggard timeline. So he ends up in Bakersfield at, I think it was called the Rainbow something. There was a Rainbow Gardens in Bakersfield, California. So this is when Merle Haggard is only 16 years old. I mean, and if you go back to our Merle Haggard episode, he goes on to have a very, you know, eventful life from this time. This is not even close to where Merle kind of gets his act together and becomes this star. We're way early in the Merle Haggard story. He's 16 years old, you know, working around Bakersfield. But Lefty Frizzell comes to this venue that he was working at. And his buddy that I think either owned it or was the manager at the time tells Lefty Frizzell, hey, this kid sounds just like you. And Lefty is like, okay, like, play something, and takes his guitar and just hands it to Merle Haggard. And this is like, Lefty at this stage, he already, even that early on, he'd already gotten a custom guitar made that had his name across the front of it. It said Lefty Frizzell. And he hands that guitar to Merle Haggard. And, you know, you can find footage of Merle telling this story, you know, about, I think he picked a Jimmie Rodgers song to play because he didn't want to just play one of Lefty's songs right back to him, even though that was most of what he did. And he did same kind of thing where he did sound a lot like Lefty, but he did a good enough job that Lefty decides, okay, I'm going to stick you out front with my band for a couple of songs, like, before I go back on. This is like in the middle. He'd already done one show and he was like going to go back on here in a little bit. During the break, he meets Merle Haggard. Merle plays a couple of songs, and in a split second, Lefty decides, all right, kid, get out there with the band. And the club manager guy comes back in. He's like, all right, Lefty, time to go on. And Lefty's like, no, send him out first. I'll go on after. And the guy is like, no, these people didn't come here to see the local kid. They came to see you. And Lefty is persistent, and he's like, I'll go on as soon as you let him go on. So Merle Haggard, suddenly, his, like, musical hero, not only is he letting him stand out front playing his guitar, he's, like, fighting for that opportunity for him. Like, Merle could have never talked his way into that position. It was only because Lefty decided, this seems like a good idea. And so he goes through and lets Merle Haggard go out there, sing a couple of songs. And he does a good job and gets, you know, it's well received. And it's, like, not a disaster at all. Later, so Merle Haggard obviously never forgot that. I don't know if you, like, it, that must have been a crazy experience for Merle Haggard to have, to be that young and then get that kind of an opportunity with that kind of a guy who's like the guy that you're emulating, shows up and is like, sure, man, step in with my band. Like, that's fairy tale movie story kind of stuff. And that really, like I said, it does have an impact on Merle, to the point where decades and decades down the road here, after Lefty's death, so we'll get there, but his guitar, I think it was a Martin D28, I think, and I might have got that wrong, but like I said, his custom guitar with his name across the front ends up being sold at auction, and it goes for like $350,000. And the guy that bought it was Merle Haggard. Like, Merle had this full circle moment, buys that guitar, and it was just sitting in his, like, he had it in his living room. He wrote the foreword to David Frizzell's book, and in it he says, I've got that guitar sitting, in my living room, and it's one of my most prized possessions. And that guitar still belongs to the Haggard family estate, which would just be so cool to, like, have that around. Like, imagine being like, Merle Haggard's kids. You're just growing up and there's like a guitar in the corner and it's Lefty's guitar, which would just be nuts. I'm going to see those guys this weekend, actually. I'm opening for Ben Haggard and Noel Haggard's going to be there. So that's going to be a cool little side note. But anyway, so just a crazy, cool full circle moment from Merle Haggard. Anyway, so back to Lefty. Let's see here. So he goes on because he has a few more hits, after 1953. And you got to, like, this is also during the time though when like rock and roll is a huge, like Elvis is getting going here. And because remember 1956 is when Elvis leaves Sun Records. So 53 is when we've got like Chuck Berry's on the rise, and like the music scene is like bubbling to life. And at this stage of the game, it does seem like Lefty's drinking has started to have a negative impact. He's doing the thing where like he's going for weeks at a time, barely eating anything, drinking a lot, missing shows, forgetting words, his voice failing him like during shows. There's a lot of not so great, impacts to his career after this. But he gets into the 60s here, and he moves back to Nashville in 1960. And this is where you get some footage of him performing on the Opry again, where he looks okay. He looks pretty good here. He's actually pulling off, because this is where he gets Saginaw, Michigan, which that's his last number one hit is Saginaw, Michigan. And that's 1964. And that gets him a Grammy nomination. 65, he goes, She's Gone, Gone, Gone. That was his last top 20 hit. 1960, the rest of the 60s, he's recording all kinds of stuff. But that's kind of his last real peak of, chart success. And but then everything kind of starts to fall apart for him here. He leaves Columbia Records. He signs with ABC in 1972. Okay, but then 1973, he writes That's the Way Love Goes. And it becomes the number one hit for Johnny Rodriguez. Or no, I might have got that wrong. But Johnny Rodriguez does it in 1973, and it's a number one hit for him. And that just kind of reflects his songwriting influence. Because, yeah, That's the Way Love Goes came out earlier. But like I said, his drinking has become a real issue here. And to the point where he has moved out of his house, like him and his wife, she does in 1975. She files for divorce. I mean, after all of this, like she's made it 30 years plus with this guy through arrests and through scandals and through him just cheating on her all over the place. She pulls her chute in 1975 and just says, I can't, this is enough. He moves in with his daughter, like in a smaller house, I think on the same property. He has like a little cabin, and he would kind of like just go back and forth. But, and then this is also kind of sad too. Like people start describing about how depressed he was at this time. So this is like, he's sort of widely accepted as this legend in the country music space, but he's also just bummed out and run down all the time. Like I said, he got put through the ringer by managers and booking agents and stuff that just took full advantage of him. At one point he talks about being sent to Canada in the winter to play like the skate rink circuit, but it was still, usually when you play at skating rinks at the time, it's the off season. So they just turn the skating rink into a stage. There was still ice on the skating rinks, and they've got Lefty Frizzell and his band out there in the freezing wind and snow trying to play. Like on a couple of occasions they play for 5 minutes and they got to stop because their hands are not working. And, but he gets, that was earlier on, but it's the same kind of thing. Just the pace of his tour schedule and the types of gigs he's having to do. He's just completely run down. He's completely worn out. And he's about to leave on this tour. And his daughter's asking him, like, what's going on? Like, why are you so tired? Or like, why are you so bummed out looking? And he's like, I'm so tired. And I'm so, like, I can't keep doing this. I'm kind of dreading going on this trip. And, like, I'm just completely, I don't have it in me anymore. And then it was like that night, he calls her again, telling her he can't move the left side of his body. He's had a stroke. So she calls an ambulance. By the time they get there, it's gotten worse. He's had a major stroke, and he's like not responsive. And and he never wakes up from that deal. I think he actually dies in the ambulance, I think, or at least soon thereafter. And but anyway, so like I said, and at the time he was in the throes of alcoholism. So he basically, causes himself a stroke when he's 47 years old, which that's too young to be having a stroke. Like that's brought on by a lifestyle that he was living here. But like I said, even then, and it's he outlived Hank by, a couple decades here, because Hank died in 1953. So he lived, 22 years longer than Hank did. But he was cut from that same cloth. That was the same kind of rock star lifestyle, same kind of fast moving, same kind of impact on the rest of the people in the country music, scene. There's a bunch of cool, like the internet is full of videos of other legends talking about how much of an impact Lefty Frizzell had on them. And like you can find a bunch of George Jones talking about him. You find a ton of Merle Haggard talking about him. And one of my favorites is Randy Travis was having an argument with, not an argument, but like, I think it was with his producer. Somebody pitched them a song or something, and Randy kind of goes, oh, that kind of sounds like a Lefty song. And the producer's like, Lefty who? And Randy Travis is just like horrified that this guy has no idea who Lefty Frizzell is, just reaches in his jacket pocket and pulls out a cassette that is Lefty Frizzell's greatest hits and like gives it to the guy. He just had it in his jacket the whole time, like for no other reason than it was like his favorite stuff. And which I've always thought that'd be kind of funny, like, kind of an embarrassing moment. Like, not only does Randy love Lefty Frizzell, he has his greatest hits cassette in his shirt pocket at the time. But anyway, I also thought, like, it's kind of interesting that, so Lefty Frizzell was kind of one of the first dudes to really lean into like the fringes and rhinestone kind of thing. Like, so, I mean, at least the fringe part, because we've talked about a bunch of these different guys that get nudie suits put together, and which the nudie suit thing is its whole separate, interesting piece of history, because like it, let's see here, because obviously Hank Williams is one of the earliest, that people really remember, but there's a whole, like, let's see here, I can't remember what that guy's name was. He was a Ukrainian guy. Let's see here. So he was a Ukrainian immigrant that moves to Los Angeles and is making outfits for like burlesque dancers, and somehow ends up getting hooked up with like the music business people. So Tex Williams is first in the 1940s, Cindy Walker in the early 50s, Hank Garland somewhere in 1950, Hank Thompson, and Tex Tyler, and then that's all before you even get to Hank Williams. So already in 1950, you've got a whole list of people that are walking around in shiny rhinestone suits. And then little Jimmy Dickens is right in there. And then you get Lefty Frizzell in 1951. And Lefty's the one that gets him to start putting fringes on things. And he actually had him put so the fringes would be on snaps, so he could change out what fringe he had on his jacket. He had different colors, like red, black, white, green, like whatever. And so that kind of becomes a style. Like, other artists would also have fringes on their jackets later. But that was kind of Lefty's mark on the style of the time. He also had a bandana on his neck all the time. I think that's because he had a birthmark on his neck. I'm not 100%. I know he had a birthmark when he was young. I don't know if that's the reason why he stuck with the bandana. I'm not sure. But like I said, just because, as far as the nudie suits go, that tradition has continued to this day that I think some people kind of forget about. Because, you got to imagine, like, we talked about Graham Parsons and the Gilded Palace of Sin album. Those guys all went and got nudie suits, and that's where you get, like, the poppies, and, Graham Parsons gets his nudie suit with, like, every kind of drug paraphernalia thing you can imagine. He's got, like, big pills and pot leaves and everything on it. That is a downstream outgrowth of this same tradition. Like, and then, like, Marty Robbins did it, and there was just kind of the Grateful Dead, Keith Richards, ZZ Top, Glenn Campbell, John Lennon, Elton John. Like, it's just all these legends continue to buy into the nudie suit thing. And, yeah, so that's a cool little side quest. I saw recently, and God love her, but I saw Dasha getting interviewed, and they were asking her, like, what was California country versus Southern country or something. And they asked her about nudie suits, and she didn't know what it meant. And she was like, you mean like nudity or like, and they were like, no, nudie suits. And she was like, and she just didn't know. And it's like, oh man, what a missed, because that's that's a California thing impacting the country music scene. And it's just such a cool tradition that I feel like could be brought back, especially by, some of these big up and coming characters like Dasha. That'd be cool. I bet she could lean into that if she wanted. But anyway, pretty cool. So just kind of between the style that is continued on to this day and the writing style and the enunciation style that Lefty had and just his general, you can just pick him out. You can pick his influence out almost the same way you can pick out Chuck Berry and his impact on rock and roll. Like he's one of these watershed characters that had kind of a sad end, just kind of a fizzled out, kind of dies young of self-inflicted problems. But anyway, like I said, his younger brother David also has a very successful music career, and like I said, is the one that wrote the book about him and kind of continues being a champion for his legacy to this day. And but yeah, pretty important and influential dude on the American music scene. So yeah, that's Lefty Frizzell. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you next week.